Welcome to our Free Speech Zone, where we do a deep dive into trauma and reintegration. This is Combat Citizen. Welcome back to the Combat Citizen podcast, Trauma and Reintegration, where we do a deep dive into your trauma and your reintegration and how you integrate into life. So with that being said, we have our next guest, Matt. So Matt, thank you for joining us today.
Hey, it's good to be here, Ryan.
Yeah. So we had a good conversation before this, which was nice. Kind of get a little intro to you. So why don't we do this? Why don't we have you kind of talk a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get into the questions.
Okay. Well, as much as I hate doing that, I'll have to go ahead and get the skinny of the rough. If I go too long, just cut me off. But so my name's Matt Biggs. I'm a father of three, 16, 5, and 3-year-old, and been married for 7 years to my wife. And we live in Birmingham, Alabama. I'm recently retired from the United States Army after 20 years, 4 months and 3 days to be exact. Recently being about a year and a half removed. So still kind of in this, weird buffer zone between, purpose and what is it. And
yeah,
now I've got new directions, but, it's just trying to, think about what I want to do when I grow up now. Kind of the struggle. So other than that, that's me in a nutshell.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I've been out since December 2018, so kind of a little bit the same time frame with you.
Really cool.
Yeah, I remember our first conversation, the current conversation you're talking about, getting out, and I don't know if you want to say something really quick about that when you're talking about those exit papers and all that, and they're like, "Well, you're done."
Yes. It's funny. You feel like, you've got so much invested into whether you did one enlistment for 3 years, 4 years, whatever that is, or you go out to, 30 years with the max you can stay in these days. But you've got so much invested emotionally, there's people that you still think count on you, but you're moving on and somebody's going to take over and do that. But so there's so much, it's such an overwhelming feeling. And then you go into this little office with like 1 or 2 people working in it, and you sit down at your desk, called a final out, appointment with your retirement services person or whatever. And there's this little box, with the U.S. Army logo on it, and maybe an envelope with a stack of papers inside. And basically that's, the lady says, here you go, sign for it. And so I signed my signature. She's like, all right, you're good to go. And I'm like, wait, what do you mean good to go? Just
you're like,
you get a flag and a little lapel pin and your DD-214. And she's like, she's super nice, but kind of like, hey, you've asked me 3 times if there's anything else. There's nothing. You can drive off base right now. So like, we left Fort Lee, Virginia was the last duty assignment. We're heading back to Birmingham, Alabama. It's about 10, 11 hour drive. And the whole time I'm like, thinking somebody was going to call me back and maybe back. It was just the weirdest thing to know that you no longer have any obligation to.
That's gotta be weird. I mean, to have nothing outside of what you were doing, anymore. Right. Okay. Well, we'll get into later on with that again. But I just wanted to kind of start out with, so like, as you heard kind of about the podcast, what drove you to wanting to actually get on the podcast? Because I found a lot of times guys, some guys are okay with it, some guys are not, but you were just like, yeah, let's do this. So I kind of wanted to.
No, I mean, I think what you're doing is great. I think the podcasts are a really good way to reach out to a greater audience, mass. And there's so many people out there that listen to podcasts these days. I just felt like if I say what, helps me or what I've dealt with, whether it be, leaving the military or something that happened while I was in the military or however, if somebody hears that, maybe they can relate to it as well.
Yeah.
And, like I do when I hear people talk, whether it be in face-to-face or on podcasts or whatever, I hear somebody that had a good idea that helped them deal with something, so I might try to implement that in my life. So yeah, when I can share, what happened to me, it always seemed to help out my soldiers if I was just honest with them,
Sure.
instead of like, you're there, I've been where you've been, I'm probably going through some of the stuff you're going through now. And so I think peer talk, or, just, discussing your experiences really helps out for other people to listen to.
I've actually found out that to be a great way, because I listen to a lot of different podcasts, and it's nice to be able, I mean, just not just veteran podcasts, but just, a wide range of stuff. And it's always nice to get that, personal experience from other people on different subjects instead of just reading about it or, whatever.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, let's see. Okay, I want to get into kind of who you were before the military and kind of what led you into joining the military.
Okay, it's a good question. That's different for everybody, obviously, but I basically I was working, cutting grass as a 13-year-old guy, and then going into high school. Once I started driving, started working at a golf course. So nothing really, there kind of led me to the military. But I had two grandfathers. Both are deceased now. One was a Korean War vet, Air Force guy, and the other was a Army vet during World War II. And he was actually a glider pilot, which is a really unique thing. They only did it once during Normandy.
That's the first thing I've heard of it.
Yeah, it was a silly plan, but it was essentially another way, sort of like the airborne mission.
Sure.
But they use these gliders, they tow them up with a plane, and then they let them go at night, and they slowly, come to the Earth's surface. But, there's not a whole lot of technology. It was balsa wood and canvas is what the planes were made, or the gliders were made out of. And they literally, held Jeeps or radio equipment or something like that to get it to the ground. So in theory, it was probably a wise thing, but then it turned out to be pretty dangerous. And it was a high attrition rate, I guess, saying. So anyway,
yeah,
I never met that grandfather because he passed away when my dad was younger. But I have all these stories about him, growing up. And my grandfather that I knew passed away in 1996, and he helped raise me. My mother was, single parent, and I had two sisters growing up. So the work ethic was always there. And my grandfather just kind of pushed me into a direction post high school because I wasn't ready to go to college. It was like, I got through high school by, the skin of my teeth, and another 4 years of school was just a really turn off at that time. So I got a real job working for Pepsi and, making pretty decent money as an 18-year-old kid. But it didn't afford me a lot of time. And I wasn't learning a whole lot, except hard work. And that was, I already knew that. So my grandfather basically said, hey, if you're not ready for school, why don't you give the military a try? Do one term, see how you like it. And then if not, you just better yourself and come out, with a new direction. So I said, okay. And that's pretty much how I went down the road to the military. And then first 3 years went by, and I just kept signing re-enlistment statements. And I just said to myself, whenever I get tired of doing this, I'll get out. And then, you got that one time after your 10th year that you have to make the decision to go indefinite or not. And so obviously.
So between like your first and your second enlistment, or what was it that made that determination of continuing? Because I it's always interesting. Some of the guys, like some of the guys are like, I want to get out, and you try to convince them, and then whatever's going on in their head about why they don't or do or something. I'm just curious.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that.
Or what was that? There was a moment that led you to that.
I hadn't really thought of it until you just asked the question. And if I quickly recollect on it, I was I joined the Army in 1998.
Okay.
So really close to my first re-enlistment. Right before my first re-enlistment, 9/11 happened. And that went from, I was at Fort Campbell at the time, and really proud to be a Screaming Eagle. You know, it was one of those places where you go to and like, you know, the Army is what you thought the Army was going to be. And,
Oh yeah.
you know, a young infantry guy, one of the most historical, you know, infantry divisions is pretty rad. So September 11th happened, and it was, you know, I've heard people say that you would never want to see another 9/11, but you'd really like to see another September 12th, so because patriotism was so, you know, high after that. And I just didn't even think twice about it at that moment. I was just having fun, and you know, there's something coming up that might let me do what both my grandfathers did, and you know, serving, you know, some kind of conflict, even though you pray that you don't have to do that. It was just that it was all encapsulated in this moment of.
Well, that's a good moment, to
Yeah.
be honest. I think that's a good, you know, that's a good memory to have, you know. And I know a lot of guys that's pretty much why they got in. It was because of 9/11, you know, or even continuing, or re-enlisting, or
That was one of the craziest times. Like, people were trying to like fight to get in. Yeah, dudes that had gotten out trying to come back in. You know, just it was a really, you know,
like,
felt like they had that piece to play in it. So,
well, there's like 40 and 50-year-olds that are like, I want to get back in. You know, I want to serve. You know, and do my part, which was great because, you know, like you're saying, the patriotism was so great during that time. It was pretty amazing.
right.
So let's talk about I guess some of your enlisted time. Some whatever you want to talk about. I mean, you could talk about you know, in your major events, deployments, things like that. The kind of the defining moments in your career that you can kind of remember and, you know, make a big impact on you.
Okay. So I, you know, and if I get long-winded, just you know, push me in the direction. But I started out as an 11 Bravo. So like, you know, I go to the recruiting station, you take your ASVAB, you do all the stuff, and recruiter's like, hey, here's a list of what is available for you to do. And I was like, no, I just want to be a grunt. And so he's like, are you sure you qualify for some other things that are, you know, that'll get you somewhere outside of the military when you leave, you know?
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, that's cool. Like, wait, I want to go into the infantry. And so, you know, hindsight, you know, retiring and there's not a lot of, you know,
options for you that we're saying.
yeah, no, it just doesn't, it gives you, I mean, I'm not saying anything poorly about 11 Bravos. We're really, like, I think we run the Army. You know,
Yeah, Bravos are awesome people. So yeah.
You know, we do a lot of things outside of that job field while you're in, but it doesn't translate well on the resume. But anyways, so I go in there, and I think one of the first memories that, you know, made a difference in the way my thinking changed about, you know, they have like, we had a 23-day field exercise at the end, similar to like the Marines Crucible at the end of their training.
Okay.
And it was, you know, something that it was cold, you know, it was in February in Fort Benning, Georgia. And
okay.
you had to overcome a lot of things mentally that, you know, maybe you've never had to deal with before in your life. So it took challenge to a whole new level.
Sure.
And I feel like that, you know, just for anybody that's not familiar with the, you know, how basic and AIT work, there's a few jobs in the military that are called one station unit training. So you do all of your training there at once, and you don't have that separation between AIT and basic. So that, I think, just the ability to overcome some things that you never had to overcome before and face those challenges. And also, it was really the first time, because I played sports growing up.
Okay.
But never in like high school sports, football my freshman year, but I just didn't grow big enough. So, you know, I kind of opted out of that. And so that was really the first time that I'd ever felt that brotherhood, you know? And it was like a camaraderie. I think that I knew I'm going to like this, you know, because people of every every, background
Yeah.
there now. So you've got, all these different brothers and sisters. Not in the infantry, we didn't have women at the time, but you got all these guys from, all different backgrounds that you're forced to be in the same place with, and then you realize quickly that they're carrying you through some of those challenges. When you're starting to feel like you're going to quit, somebody's going to come over and slap you on the butt and say, "Hey, it's time to get up and move out." So
that reminds me of something I wanted to kind of. So did you ever? So you guys had ruck marches in basic and all that, right?
sure.
We had this one ruck march, and we literally we we pissed the drill sergeants off. I mean, really bad towards the end, and it was like our last week or whatever. And so we're doing the last ruck march, and it was supposed to be like, God, it was supposed to be 9 miles, I think, and it ended up being like 14, 15, 6, something like that, And so we went around, and eventually we ended up on this hill. It was Motherfucker Hill. It was bad. It was really, really bad. And of course, we're all walking up, going, "Oh," it was like we're done. I mean, we had pissed the drill sergeants off so much. We actually, the last week, we did not even have drill sergeants because the drill sergeant said, "Fuck it, we're done." Like it was just we were like, these other drill sergeants are your home now. Like they'll deal with you, So we're out anyway. So we're doing this rock march, and the reason why I bring it up is because, what you're talking about, the camaraderie and the pushing, is that, we're going up this hill, and it was so funny because we started singing like "This Little Light of Mine" because we're like trying to get up the hill. We're trying to keep our minds, going, and we'd have our drill sergeants or the drill sergeants from the other teams, and they're just like, or platoons, and they're like, "Shut the fuck up!" And we're like, we're trying to keep going here, Anyways, but a longer story from that. But anyways, I guess what I was trying to get at is, as far as the camaraderie, was there any specific like little situations that you can remember that were just dead on about people taking care of each other?
Yeah. One's really silly, but well, no. If I go farther down the line, yes, like so I'll give you a little bit of history. So 11 Bravo from 98 to 2003. So I lost a bunch of hearing in Korea on my first assignment from a claymore explosion. And so I had bad hearing, tinnitus or whatever for a couple of days or whatever. It went away. But then when I went to re-enlist, it was I re-enlisted as 11 Bravo, but then go through, I come back from Korea and I'm going to Fort Campbell, and I'm trying to go through SFAS. So there's a big, long physical for SFAS. And I figured out here.
What is that real quick?
It's a Special Forces Assessment and Selection.
That's what I thought, yeah.
I think it's called something else now.
For those of the people that are actually listening to it, that are just like,
yeah, I know. And if I do that again, I'll definitely.
It's okay. This podcast is meant for a lot of people, so I just figured I'd just kind of get that out there and make sure people understand it.
So if you're trying out for the Special Forces, they have a really in-depth, long physical to make sure you meet all the requirements to get in. And hearing is one of those things that they frown upon. So I had 60% loss and 70% in the other ear, and couldn't hear the beeps. And basically, being an infantry guy, you don't have a lot of promise in continued hearing growth. So they basically said, you can either get med boarded and leave the military. I just re-enlisted, and or you can take a non-noise hazardous job that the Army picks for you. And so I was like, well,
I can already. I mean, you told me this already, but I'm just still like, oh my God.
Yeah. So, and I've only been in for, I think, 4 years at the time. So I got reclassed to, which was it's a 91 Echo at the time, but it's a 68 Echo now, which is a dental specialist. And so I go from this 11 Bravo hardcore, hard charging guy to basically like, you've been to a dental clinic. It's like wearing BDUs to a civilian workplace. You know, it's like,
Yeah.
it's not even the same.
Mm.
And I worked with a colonel for like 6 months, and I didn't even know he was in the Army at all. They just called him Dr. So-and-so, and like some people called him by his first name and blah, blah, blah. So I go there, and then when that 3-year tour was up, I think it was about 2006, maybe.
Okay.
And the Army had kind of shifted. It was in the hottest part of the conflict, you know, in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Sure.
And the Army said, hey, you know, I'm paraphrasing for them, but to me, they said, hey, we paid all this money for you to go to this training, but we no longer need this particular skill set. So we're not going to continue to, unless you had to have some identifier or whatever. So they said, we've got 3 more MOSs that you can pick from to reclass. So I reclassed reclassed a second time. So my 3rd job in the Army, and I picked Mortuary Affairs Specialist because I didn't want to be an 88 mic truck driver or a chemical soldier, you know. So
sure,
I took Mortuary Affairs, which, you know, if you
yeah,
hear the word up front, it sounds really morbid. In some cases, it is, because you're essentially, if you're downrange, you're making sure that your fallen service members get sent back stateside to Dover in a timely manner. You know, so that the families can get closure faster or start the grieving process faster. They're not going to, you know, get past that faster.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
so, yes, that long way around to get to your question was yes. So like, and this is another reason why I thought this would be a great thing to do, is because, you know, we dealt with so much death in that MOS that every Friday we had a visit from a combat stress team, right?
Okay.
So I'd only been in theater for we were in Balad, Iraq, and I'd only been in theater for, you know, a couple of weeks. And so you're learning your job from the people that are leaving, and just how they do things, and all that. Left seat, right seat, right, I believe,
Sure, yeah.
people refer to it as. And so you get into that. And then once the flow starts, now I've got this combat stress team coming on Friday. The other team had left, and now I've got my guys. And we all sat down with them once, and they were asking questions like out of a book. And it was very calculated, you know?
Very impersonal.
Like that silly, how does that make you feel thing? You know, it was that vibe.
Yeah.
And I don't want to express my freaking feelings with you. Like,
Yeah.
you're not even sincere in the way you're asking the question. It just felt fake. And so
it's probably what, monotone. They're like, hey, so are you feeling this way? And you're like, come on.
yeah. So we had my team was 11 people at that particular collection.
What rank were you at that point in time?
I was a staff sergeant then.
Okay.
So the way they break that down is, it was essentially a large squad. I was a platoon sergeant as an E6 because our MOS only has 400, and, you know, it's under 5, between 475 and 500 usually.
Okay.
Soldiers in the entire Army. There's only 2 active duty companies. So when we went downrange, we had a company of 200, but the mission only requires 75. So we squeezed 2 platoons together. And so between me and the other platoon sergeant, like, they covered Afghanistan and we covered Iraq.
Oh,
and
wow.
there was like 6 collection points in Iraq and 2 in Afghanistan. And so everything went back to Kuwait City International Airport.
Okay.
And then they get flown over to Dover Port Mortuary in Delaware. And but so I have 11 person team. So it was a staff sergeant, and I had 2 sergeants that were, you know, the direct leaders underneath me. And they had 2 teams of, you know, 4 or 5, depending on what size element we had. So when we were able to sit down post the combat stress team being there, you know, that was when the real, like, I guess, you know, unity starts, because we're all going through the same crappy thing together, you know?
Yeah.
And all of us are dealing with something different. And
did you guys ever talk about it to each other?
Absolutely. And like I said, I killed the combat stress team. Bad choice of words, but we knew they were coming. We hung a sign or saying that we were processing remains, even if we weren't, because, they would see that and just like do an about face and roll out.
Sure.
We also had a chaplain and a Marine Corps gunnery sergeant who would come by when we did have remains in, and they were there to basically, take the information from the casualties and start the process of sending the information back.
Yeah.
But the chaplain always, spent a lot of time with our younger guys to try to make sure their head was in the right place. And we took measures. Like, I noticed my soldiers in the first couple of weeks, they're reading letters that they find in the soldiers' pockets and seeing pictures and, really taking it to heart and comparing themselves, like,
yeah,
I've got kids, and if I see a guy who has a pocket full of pictures of his kids, now I'm going to start thinking like that could be me. Am I next? You get really deep inside your own head if you're not careful. So I had to make rules to say like, hey, we just count the pictures. We don't look at them.
Sure. Yeah, because you don't want to get in depth,
right?
Too in depth with what's going on.
Check
yeah.
The letters. Don't read the doggone letters. Like. Get the letters, count them, because we had to inventory their personal gear.
Oh,
and then you put it in a pouch, and then it goes with the remains with the transfer case. And so when it gets to Dover, they re-inventory stuff just to make sure things like wedding rings, wallets, cash doesn't get lost in the shuffle.
Sure.
So it's a real meticulous process. But yeah, so it really did help for us to talk to each other about it. And it was like, hey, let's take the rank off for a second and let's all talk like, I'm Matt, you're, Ryan, and for a minute, let's kill the uncomfortableness and talk it out.
I think that's the biggest thing that I found out in some of the units that I was in is that some of them didn't deal with any of that stuff. Not that I can't say that I dealt with that kind of thing. But, just anything that anybody would encounter, because we had on deployment, we actually had one of the guys, he got out of, this is all the most information I know about. I mean, I'm not like, I wasn't like there exactly, but the things I heard. This guy got out of, was it an MRAP, and he gets out, and this guy on a motorcycle had a machete and was like, anyways. So those kind of things, and people had to deal with those kind of things in the conversations that they had to have. And I know some of the people didn't deal with anything. So it's interesting to see, as a unit, what coping mechanisms or what things that they deal with, and especially with not taking the rank off. I think that's most important in the whole part of it. Because we get so set in our conversations and how we communicate with each other in the military.
Sure. A lot of times it makes it uncomfortable, like you don't want to break that barrier between, leadership and likership. But I mean, we're all human beings. I feel like I got more accomplished as a leader in terms of, having a relationship with the soldiers as far as professional, but not being the asshole that's always like, blah, 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 screaming all the time. If I felt like if I was more of a human being, still keeping that, rank relationship, but not making it the point to do it all the time. We still had discipline, but it was more of a like, hey, I'm relying on you to do this job, and not just telling them like what they're going to do, but giving them like the freedom to do it how they wanted to, as long as the mission was accomplished.
Sure.
Giving them an opportunity to grow as well, and not just feeling like they're under somebody's thumb all the time. It's just, I think if you give that respect, I appreciated that when I was younger. It was.
Do you think that contributed to? I mean, because I don't know how overall your unit was. Like, the camaraderie and the connection and all that. Do you think that kind of contributed to your unit's success? I mean, as a unit.
Sure, I think so. And again, we're super unique in the fact that you wouldn't encounter a mortuary affairs soldier very often. So, like I
No.
said, Fort Lee, Virginia is the only place where they have active duty companies. There are
Okay.
two, and they're literally right down the street from each other. So our community's already like, we already know, and it can be a good thing and a bad thing. If there's
Sure.
gossip at one company, we'll know about it that day at the other
Yeah.
company. And we all know who each other is. So it's like,
Well, it's interesting after talking to you about it. When I was in Afghanistan, there was they had one of the what was it, containers that it was, the mortuary affairs area, and I never talked to anybody that had anything to do with that at all. So it's interesting, when we started talking about it, I'm like, oh, okay, well, it'd be good to know a little about it. maybe not the details, but whatever. But it's nice to know that.
I remember the first day that I left Fort Lee, because I reclassed in 2006. I deployed with 92 Mikes, led a team, came back. I became an AIT instructor for the MOS, and then I got to say goodbye to Fort Lee, and I went to Fort Bliss, Texas, and it's all the way out in El Paso, super cool. And I was like, well, I'm going to get to work with all kinds of MOSs, because I was going to a sustainment brigade, which is literally everything that supports the warfighter. So you got your ammo, cooks and all these other people, parachute riggers. I get to my office and meet my boss for the first time. He was a parachute rigger, chief.
Oh, okay.
Warrant officer 2. And then there was me, E7, 92 Mike, and the other E7 was a laundry and bath specialist, right? And so that was our team, and we were called field services for whatever reason. But when I walked in, Chief goes, "Oh man, this is the first time I've ever worked with a 92 Mike." And he's like, "Really weird though." I mean, because I don't know, I was a little thinner then, and had the, I don't know. He said I looked like a little surfer dude, but he expected me to look like some like Undertaker. I was like,
what do I expect to see?
Yeah, he's like, I expected some like dark, guy and with a weird way about him, and I'm like, well, I wasn't always a 92 Mike, and I didn't pick it by choice. It was just given to me. So here I am. So, but it's just funny, the misconception or the thought that you would have if you hear that term, and then
sure, yeah,
I'd expect.
So how many moves did you make in your career to different bases and locations?
So I left Fort Benning and I went to Korea. So I was supposed to do the awesome, like, go to OSUT, go to Ranger School, Airborne School, and go to Fort Bragg. That was my contract. So I did a little backwards. There was a bunch of cadets in Airborne School.
Okay.
And, so they sent us to RIP, which is the Ranger Indoctrination Program. It's like pre-Ranger. So it's like, a really tough phase before actual Ranger School starts.
Okay.
And it kind of weeds out all the people that they don't think will make it through the actual Ranger School. So I get through that. Okay. And it was like the worst, 10 or 12 days of my life. And then they had the slots for Airborne School open up. So I go to Airborne School, and I broke my leg on my second jump. I couldn't get back in time to, just do my last 3 jumps and leave. I had to go through the school over again because it took a long time for that break to heal.
Sure.
So that completely erased my contract, and they sent me to Korea instead. So, I was like, oh, I'm disappointed.
Yeah.
Bad that I had to go to Korea. It actually turned out to be out of 20 years, it was the best assignment that I ever had. And I was on the border of North and South Korea. So if you see all these defector videos, or like Trump went up there and shakes Kim Jong-un's hand, at that borderline, like I was literally a private PFC weed eating that little curb that separated North and South Korea, and there's this dude like North Korea, a KPA soldier, North Korean, just like 2 feet from my face, and I'm like, please do not kick rocks in his face because all I got's a weed eater, and I got some guys behind me that are pulling security, and that was it. It was like literally the craziest detail I had to do as a private. So to answer your question, I went from Benning to Korea.
Okay.
From Korea, I went to Campbell, then Germany for 3 years, and then Germany to Fort Lee was when I reclassed the second time. Fort Lee to El Paso, Texas to Hawaii for 3 years, and then Hawaii back to Fort Lee, and then a couple of deployments in between there from those places. So,
so like 2 or 3 deployments.
Yeah, 2 deployments total, and we did things a little different on the mortuary affairs side too, because like I told you before, we only had to have 75 people on a rotation. Mm-hmm. Our company would actually get a year's long assignment for orders to that deployment, but we had 200 people in the company. It's the only place I've ever seen people like fight to get on a deployment, because there's nothing to do in Fort Lee. And if you're in Fort Lee, you're just doing details and blah, 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 and busy work.
So they're like, I really want to go because I want to get somewhere different.
Yeah. And so they would take that deployment and they would split it up into 2 task force. So, like we could send 75 first, and then 6 months later, we'll send our second team from that company, and then the other company would take over after that. The point to that is kind of, goes with what we're talking about. A year is a really long time to be that intimate with death all the time.
Right.
It's 6 months is pretty tough dealing with all that. I think we sent 1,100 remains back, 1,100 of our fallen service members back during a 6-month rotation.
Oh, shit.
Yeah, it's a lot of, that's a lot of death. It's up until then, but before I became a night team, like I've probably seen maybe 10, dead people in my life. Like it just wasn't a fun thing.
I think I've only seen 2 in my life, and I can't imagine seeing that.
And you also have to imagine, Ryan, is that they're typically in like the worst condition. You're talking about war and a lot of IEDs and inside vehicles, and just really traumatic.
Oh yeah.
And so the soldiers that do that job, they deal with an awful lot, probably, that they don't get to talk about a lot. So that's why we did that there, is just talk with our peers, talk amongst ourselves about it, because it sure wasn't working with the combat stress team. And then you still got to go home, after your deployment. You've got this reintegration process, and you got to go talk to one of those counselors, and they ask you all these questions about how you feel now. And there's like stigma about like, if I tell them how I feel, they're going to kick me out of the army. Like it was just.
So how long did you notice, or how long did it take that you notice that there's something that was going on with you, like more than just, like, I don't know, like for instance, for me, look, when I get back from deployment, I was a 42 Alpha, so I was, office pogue and whatever you want to fucking call it. So I got back, we had about 3 weeks off, and then came back to the office, and it was I noticed something about 6 months later. It was weird, like 5-6 months later, that something had changed. I started having, I actually have sound issues. Like I have sound sensitivity, which is fucking ridiculous. Social anxiety itself. Obviously I deal with PTSD as well. And then a couple other little things. But I guess what I'm asking is, like, if was there anything that changed for you that you noticed, if you wanted to talk about it. I know.
Yeah, I a lot of what you just said, it's truly like comparable. I went through anxiety. Anxiety is probably the worst thing, because like panic attacks are real. It's a real physical feeling. It's so weird, because like I thought I was having a heart attack, and this is post retirement, and
sure,
like, yeah, your EKG's fine, you're good. And it felt like I had a 400-pound person sitting on my chest, but it was just anxiety from something that I didn't know. I would tell you probably one of the worst things that happened to me was the first deployment as a 92 Mike, and the first remains I'm looking at, and they're in your uniform.
Sure.
And the dude that was over us, it was like we had a platoon leader who was the acting commander because our commander and first sergeant stayed back in the rear.
Okay.
So we had a lieutenant, and then I was a staff sergeant. There's E7 in charge of he was like the forward first sergeant, And he'd been doing this job a lot longer than I had. So I guess like I'm in the zone looking at this dude on the table, and Sergeant Sanchez just smacks me in the back of the head. And he's like, "Hey, Biggs, you're gonna have to quit that shit." And I was like, "What?" And he goes, "You're thinking too much about it right now." And I'm like, "Dude, what do you even know what I'm doing?" Like,
what's going on? Yeah.
Hit me in the back of the head. But he goes, "You better get your brain right, or you're gonna have a long deployment." And I'm like, "All right." So from that moment, it's probably the worst thing in the world. I started to compartmentalize everything. I wasn't facing anything. To me at that moment, it was just science. It was like, the body is the vehicle, the soul's gone. So now let's just get this vehicle back to their loved ones. So, do your job. That was it.
Yeah. You're pretty much mission oriented and nothing else.
And I'd never really done that before. I'd never really, I don't know, like for me, I didn't know I was doing it, but it was something my brain just did to help with my circumstance at that moment. But then when I came back home, I didn't have emotion. Like I was really callous, and people will think, you're so unaffected by anything. And I'm like, maybe I should address that, but I never did. And, for a while anyways.
Yeah.
And I went to my daughter at the time was studying, about presidents. Okay. We're in Fort Lee, Virginia. So we're only a couple of hours away from DC. And, now this is like a couple years post deployment, post that deployment. Yeah. And it was just like the perfect storm. We're walking down the Vietnam Memorial. There's a guy talking to the wall, big old burly dude. My daughter was little at the time. She was like, "Hey, why are you crying?" And I was like, "Come on, girl." Like, he's like, "No, do you mind if I tell her?" And I'm like, "No, I'm not at all. She knows sort of what I do." And he was like, "Well, little girl, I went to war with this guy twice and he didn't come back the second time. And we grew up together, blah, blah, blah." So, and she's in her little innocent brain was like, talking to him, and he was just giving her everything. And I'm like, man, that's really touching. So there was that. We started to walk away because, let him get back to his stuff. And I look over, and there's like 4 dudes in a wheelchair with each service flag, above them. It was like a weekend where they had all the little flags all over the place. Mm-hmm. And it was almost as if it was like set up. And it's walking down the sidewalk, and she says, "So Dad, like, where's the wall with all the people that you sent home?"
Oh no.
And I have my sunglasses on, and she's like, "What's wrong, Daddy? Why are you crying?" I'm like, "My eyeballs are sweating. It's okay.
It's hot out here. Yeah, it's not hot out here, honey."
It was like the dam busted, and I just had to deal with a lot of feelings at that moment, and it was overwhelming, but it was a release. It was great. But aside from the compartmentalization, I would say maybe you might have dealt something with it, but like quick temperedness.
Yeah. I totally agree. Like, I deal with the same stuff. I mean, I literally am going to therapy because of stuff. But no, it's like quick tempered stuff. It's the quick reactions. Like talking to somebody and they're saying something and you're like, you're here, and you're supposed to be here in the conversation, and it's not really happening. There's anyways.
No, earlier when when you're young and you think you're invincible and all that stuff, I had the impression that these people that talk about the invisible wounds were just being silly and over emotional. And, that first time, when I started to identify with my own feelings and figure out that It's not silly, you know, that's actual, there's something going on with me that I didn't come in the Army like this.
Yeah.
And, you know, these experiences I've had have made me, you know, develop stuff that you don't even know that you're doing. You know, like I snapped off at my mom when I came back from things because they were just like, I get home and it was like, all right, got this plan, this plan, this plan, this plan. For the last 6 months, I've been in charge of everything.
Sure.
And now I'm coming home and people are pushing me in all these directions. And I didn't like people, you know.
Yeah.
I
agree. It took me 3 weeks to be able to drive, dude. Like when I came back, like my wife was like, okay, what you're doing is you're driving around the neighborhood. And then the next week was driving around the city. And then the next week after that was driving on the freeway because I have to drive 45 minutes to work once that 3 weeks is over. So I didn't like people at all, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, that's why I like this, you know, this podcast point of view, or the, you know, the matter behind it, is because what I was saying earlier is the things that you and I talk about today, you know, might make somebody feel normal, you know, if they hear it. And because that's exactly what happened to me. I was just like, man, this is, you know, crazy. And then when I start hearing people talk about stuff, I'm like, God, maybe I am not so, you know, I might be messed up, but I'm not the only one, you know. And
that's what things that I'm learning while, you know, as I'm talking to people. And then of course the first guy that was on the podcast, you know, it just learning the things that I mean, he didn't really go into too much detail on things that's going on with him. But then, you know, you kind of understand that concept that there is something, you know, and then you're not alone, you know. And then some of the guys I've talked to to join this podcast, and learning, you know, the long career they've had and the things that they've gone through. And it's just amazing, you know, how we all think that we're by ourselves, in our thinking. So I'll just say something that's pretty raw, for myself. And just so you know, this is a free speech, gentlemen. We can pretty much say anything we want to say. So if there's something that you want to kind of come out and talk about, but so whatever you want to talk about. But so I'll say something. So pretty much like an hour before, and hour before this podcast, I was doing some yard work. Got done with the yard work. Walked in the house, and I literally was just like, the thing you were talking about with the weight on your chest, you know, because I deal with panic attacks. I can tell when they're coming on. It's pretty easy to know now, about a half an hour or whatever away. But this thing was like weighted on me, and I was literally stuck on the floor in my office, like for probably 20 minutes. And I'm laying on the ground, like just, I need to get out of this. I need to figure out how to do this. And it's those conversations you're having with yourself. And then you're thinking, oh shit, I'm the only one. Like I'm the only one that fucking deals with this, you know? And it's just that those conversations that happen in your head. And finally I was like, you know what? Fuck it. I need to get up. Went and took a shower, and I'm like, okay, let's start the day. You know, let's start this. Go. But those things, and I'm sure this probably happens to you regularly. I don't know if it happens to you regularly or not, but I'm pretty sure that there's some things you probably relate to, that you encounter, that these kind of things happen, you know, randomly.
Yeah.
So that's when I ask you, like, things that have happened, you know, those, and I'm liking that we kind of talk about it because people can see, oh, wow, he's real, you know, or you know, it happens. Like it happens to me.
Yeah. You ever had any issues with sleep?
Okay, so I don't have problems with sleeping per se. I get to sleep pretty easily. The only problems that I've been having lately, is dude, I was never in a firefight. Okay, I'm just letting you know. Like I was an office pogue. Okay, I was literally an office guy. But for some reason, like about a week ago, I randomly had a night where it was 3 nightmares in a row. And the first one was me basically killing people in my dream. That was pretty much what was happening. And I was so set in it. Like my wife was trying to wake me up, and I'm like not waking up. Like it was just, you know, seriously in there. And then I went back to sleep, came back into another one. Don't even remember what the second one was about. My wife woke me up and I was like, okay, I want to go back to sleep. So I went back to sleep, went back into a third one. The third one was, and I'm glad this wasn't like out there, like me yelling at my wife, but I was yelling in my dream. Like I knew, like when I dream, I know I'm dreaming. Like I can tell I'm dreaming, but I'm doing whatever else is going in the dream. So I'm yelling my head off in the dream. And my wife's trying to wake me up, and I'm like, no. I don't know why. I don't know why it happened. So yeah, I don't really have any problems for sleeping per se, but all of a sudden it happened a year ago, almost a day, that having a nightmare. But
yeah. See, that's what you said, the poke thing and not being in firefights. And I think it's important for a lot of people to understand that just being a soldier and being, in some cases, not even having deployed anywhere, we have a regular, situation going on. And I give you an example. It's like, if you're in one of these units where you're pulling staff duty and Sergeant Major's rule is nobody sleeps 24 straight hours, and I had a doctor explain to me about, having sleep apnea stems from irregular sleep almost, as a habit, because you're forced to stay up long periods of time and your sleep pattern becomes irregular. And then, he said that can lead to, sleep problems in the future.
So do you have problems sleeping then?
Yeah. Yeah. My wife does too. Cause if I start going for I can't wear the CPAP because I throw it off my face as soon as I get to sleep. Like every third or fourth night, I just don't sleep. I like lay there, it's just weird. And I'll get exhausted and then finally sleep. I dream, but I don't know what it's about. I've never had any like nightmares that people talk about, having in association with being, in a conflict or anything. But yeah, like there's just so many things that if you sit and think about your time in the military and think about a problem that you have, you can probably make a correlation between something that you did while you were there, and relate it to what your problem that you're facing is. And like I said, just it was kind of hard to explain this to my wife, but like I was always at my best when I was there. I hated like the anxiety of getting ready for a deployment. Sucked.
Sure.
It sucked, and I hated that process all the way up until the time when we left. Then I'm like as soon as the wheels took off the ground, I was like, yes, okay, we're good. Then you get over there, and there's that process to start coming back home.
Yeah. And
like your anxiety ramps up again. I was better in the moment as opposed to all the planning and preparation and stuff. And I think that's a lot like where a lot of the anxiety would get. I'd never had a migraine headache in my life until probably
you got back
3 weeks before leaving, just because of the stress. Because like,
well, yeah, there's so much going on when you're doing the
pre-deployment stuff.
Well, pre-deployment, but then when you're leaving, pre-deployment to leave.
Yeah, you're totally changing your life. Like, one of the three biggest things, I think, the military. Like, I was reading something my dad showed me, and it was like, the top 10 stress. I don't have a fact checker right now, but like it's like the top 10 things that stress people out the most. And one was like moving, getting married, getting divorced, like or losing somebody.
I can agree. Yeah.
At the top, and so like in one case, like I was experiencing 3 of those things all at once, like moving, and then I was going through the divorce at the time, and then
that's pretty tough.
We lost somebody in our unit, like a couple weeks before that. So there's all 3 of these, giant life-changing things, and now I've got 3 of those. But you were saying something before, and I think one of the things that helped me, because you said you're going to be raw, and I think that's what helped me help my younger soldiers. It took me some time to figure it out. I'm saying, like, I was always this, like, knife hand and yelling at people and blah, blah, blah. But I felt like, because not everybody, a lot of people, when they get up in the rank system, they try to never let any of those skeletons come out of their closet, like, yeah, I'm just perfect, but your soldiers see that and they know better, but you're not relatable, So, like, when we were on that first mortuary deployment, I had 3 soldiers going through a divorce. So I decided that I would share, and be raw with them. Hey, I'm going through the same shit. So
sure,
let's all talk about it, and at least that I'm going through the same thing. So when I'm giving you advice, I'm not just saying something I know nothing about, and I might learn something from you too. And, it just helped me more. And I thought I was helping them more whenever I was open and honest. And, I was flawed also, I mean,
I think it's a great idea. I mean, I think the more that you can be authentic and real and, instead of putting a face on or a mask or whatever you're doing, like your rank on there, I think that kind of helps out. So I do have a question, and then we're kind of leading into the end here, but we can talk longer. We can do another podcast, whatever. But I'm sure there's a lot of things that we can talk about.
Yeah.
But so as this is kind of a free speech zone, what I like to be able to do is offer those that are on my podcast the ability to be able to say whatever they want to say, something that maybe they haven't been able to say because they don't want to tell their spouse, they don't want to tell their friends, they don't want to tell anybody, but something that's kind of on your mind. It could be anything really, that you either hold in. It's something that's controlled by your environment, the people that you don't want to say something to, whatever you want to do, you can say something. So
okay.
Yeah.
Woo.
Yeah.
Okay. But no, I did tell my wife this. It's kind of been, heavy on my heart for, as long as it's been going on. All the divide in the country right now, and, kind of got heavy on me because I felt like, just left 20 years of military service because I was proud to fight for this country, be a part of that with so many different people.
Sure.
In 20 years, like, I never, besides bickering, but, like, as far as racial divide,
yeah,
like, I didn't experience that. And I have worked with so many people from so many places. I've worked with people that have never seen a black dude, and I've worked with black guys that have never seen a white dude. But, in basic training, you learn all this stuff about people. And if I had to complain or say something that's on my mind, I would just say, people just need to get along. Like, there's enough stuff going on that, it's disappointing, I guess, to see our country kind of falling apart by the wayside, as, like, right before your eyes. And it's
right.
You think about your pride in your country, and I don't think it's as bad as it looks. And I hate the media so bad because they put a magnifying glass on something that's, it's a really big deal,
right?
But it's not. Probably 80% of the average Americans aren't seeing this firsthand all the time.
Sure.
And it's being fed that way. And it makes me pissed off that, I'll never regret serving in the military and serving alongside those, all those wonderful people that, we were serving with. And if I had to give a little shout out to the people that I would say when I was AIT instructor, I joined the Army in 1998, and if you aren't familiar, there wasn't shit going on in the world then.
No.
Maybe Bosnia and Kosovo rotation.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe one in Egypt too, but aside from that, there was nothing dangerous going on. And while I couldn't afford college, and that was a little bit of a motivator to go there, and I know people usually get like, he can't afford college money, but like I told you before, there was more to it than that. But I would give that, as I'm talking about all these wonderful people I've served with, I always told these young kids, anybody that came in post 9/11, whether you were in for a year, 3 years, got kicked out, don't care. You volunteered to go into a, hostile military environment where almost without a doubt that you could be going overseas at any time. And there's some real shit going on out there. So that's why I always said to the young guys, like, hey, y'all are brave. Like, y'all are truly exemplary. But yeah, like, I would say keep pushing. It's kind of a jumbled, emotional thought, but it's
the one that kind of take from that is a conversation I've had with a buddy of mine about the fact that when you get into the military, it's a brotherhood, it's a sisterhood. It doesn't matter what nationality you are, what color, anything else like that. For us, when we see another vet, it has nothing to do with race or color or anything else like that. It's the camaraderie now. And I just think it's amazing the difference that, vets have and civilians have, and the thought processes and all that stuff. So I'm glad you said that, because at least, people can see that, the military, we look past those differences, and I mean, we're meant to. I mean, that's what we're supposed to do so that we can get the job done. But, at the end of the day, it helps us to become more of a cohesive unit and a family so that we can have those conversations. And so we don't think of all the bullshit, So, thanks for joining us. We'll probably have you on again because, obviously there's probably a lot more stuff that we can talk about. So, but yeah, thanks everybody for watching. So I was thinking about one thing we were talking about, people not being perfect, is so our sponsor. So I'm not perfect, you're not perfect, but what is perfect is the battle box, which is right here, and it's backwards. So just make sure, is actually the perfect carrying case to carry. I usually carry essential oils, things like that in it. And you have what you have? Yeah. So this is So the battle box. So it can be found on battlebox.co, and also there's Instagram on there that's your battle box. So thank you everybody for watching, and look forward to the next podcast. We will definitely have more fun with our next guest, and then if anybody wants to join the podcast, just let me know. There'll be a calendar. You can sign up on Calendly to be able to sign up for a podcast. So thank you, everybody, and have a great day.
Awesome.